I don't know a lot about a lot, but I know a little about painting. And I could tell you a lot of videos out there about painting laminate furniture are just wrong. So let's talk about the right way to prep and paint laminate furniture. What's laminate furniture? The majority of mass-produced furniture is laminate or laminated, same thing. It's cheap wood covered in a thin decorative film. That film's called laminate. The laminate disguises the cheap wood and creates a durable stain-resistant surface. Stain resistance includes being non-stick to paint, so that's why sometimes laminate furniture is so hard to paint. If you want to paint something that's supposed to repel paint, you've got to prep it to accept paint. I know you've seen those videos, I've watched them too, and the way they do it might work just long enough for them to shoot their video, but one day someone's going to rub up against it and the paint will come right off. If you're going to spend your precious time painting something, why do it half-assed? Spend the extra few minutes to prep it right, and you'll have a paint job that's good for life. So I'm going to show you how to successfully prep and paint on laminate, but actually, you can apply these steps for painting just about anything if you want guaranteed success. This is a dresser from Ikea. I really like the design, especially with the frosted glass panels, but I don't like the color. I'm going to paint the drawer faces silver because I like the look of metal and glass. It'll look kind of like these garage doors, which I really like. And I'll paint the cabinet beige to match the bed. I've got some paint left over from when I made this bed several years ago. I think this will give it a custom, maybe almost built-in look. There are 3 steps to prepping for a successful paint job. Step 1 is cleaning. Paint does not like dust, and it especially does not like oil or wax. Your body oozes oil. You can't see it, but everything your skin touches has your oil on it. Well, what if it's brand new? Then it probably has wax on it from the manufacturing process. Anytime I'm prepping, I wear gloves, so none of the oils from my hands get onto the surface. If you don't want to wear gloves, just don't touch the surface with your bare hands. If you do, make sure you clean it off. I'm not taking any chances. The cleaner I like to use most is called Prep-All. It's about 20 bucks a gallon online or at the hardware store in the paint department. Now, if you don't want to buy this, plain old window cleaner is also a pretty decent degreaser. Step 2 in prepping is scuffing and sanding. The reason we clean before scuffing is if there's any oil on the surface, you'll embed the oil into the surface by sanding over it. I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad. These pads are in the paint department at your hardware store. Different color Scotch-Brite pads have different roughnesses or grit. The red pad is like 320 grit sandpaper. You can also use the green pad, which is around 600 grit, or light gray, which is like 800. You can also use sandpaper instead of these pads. You'll want to stay between 300 grit and 800 grit. You don't want to go lower than 300 because the deep scratch marks will show through your paint job. You could probably go higher than 800, but the higher the number, the smoother the surface finish. If you go too smooth, the paint won't have anything to grab onto. This leads me to the whole reason for this step. Painting is a mechanical bond. It relies on the paint's ability to physically grab onto the surface. By scuffing the laminate, we're creating millions of little scratches the paint can grab onto. Obviously, I have to do some masking here so I don't get any paint on the glass. If you're painting the whole piece and don't need to mask anything off, good for you. Okay, that's 1 down. Okay, so step 3 is primer, but before I do that, I'm going to do a quick step 1 and wipe it off to take off any sanding dust and just in case I got any oil on it. Now step 3 is actually optional. You don't have to primer. If you've cleaned and scuffed your surface well enough, you can actually go right to paint. But if you're willing, primer makes an even better bond between the laminate and paint. Also, if you have some fine scratches you want to hide, or let's say the laminate has a fine texture you want to make smooth, primer is also good for that. I'm using Rust-Oleum filler primer. Another primer I really like is Kiehl's original primer, not the new stuff. Pretty much any primer will do really, but I like these 2 primers because they go on thick, so they're good at feeling, and if I decide to sand the primer for an ultra smooth finish, these are easy to sand. It's pretty hard to go wrong when spraying primer. If you plan on sanding it, you want a nice heavy coat, maybe even 2 coats if you're trying to hide some surface defects. By heavy, I mean as much as you can without causing runs. Even if it runs, it's not a big deal. Give it a few hours to dry and you can sand the runs out. If you're doing 2 coats, let the first coat dry 15 or 20 minutes before applying the second coat. If you don't plan on sanding or you don't care about hiding anything on the surface, just a light coat will do just to help with adhesion. So we've done the 3 steps on the drawer faces. Let's do the 3 steps again on the dresser cabinet. Well, first I'm going to use some body filler to fix these scratches. If you need to fill in deep scratches, my favorite thing to use is auto body filler. It doesn't matter what brand. Bondo brand filler is most common and most hardware stores carry it, again in the paint department. It's not just for metal body panels, it works really well on wood. Okay, step 1, cleaning. Step 2, scuffing or sanding and cleaning again. And step 3, primer. Again, this is optional. You could skip the primer and go straight to paint if you're doing it quick and dirty. So these are the 3 steps to prepping for paint. Now it's time to paint. I like to give the primer at least 2 hours to dry before I sand the primer or paint over it. If you don't wait long enough, weird things can happen. Most commonly, you'll get what's called fish eyes in the paint. As primer dries, the liquid solvent that's evaporating will make bubbles that rise through the paint, leaving little craters. These are called fish eyes. There's no such thing as waiting too long between primer and paint, although if you wait more than a day, you should scuff up the primer a bit like we did in step 2. I'm using automotive paint, so there's some mixing involved. If your partner doesn't demand absolute perfection and she's okay with you rolling on a fresh coat of paint or spray painting it from a rattle can, good for you. Keep watching though, you might learn something. For the drawer faces, I'm using a silver paint. The exact color is Honda Sebring Silver. It'll make these things look like they're made of aluminum. Spray paint from a can will probably work just as well, but this stuff's been sitting in my cabinet a couple of years and I need to use it up. Notice how I'm not wearing a respirator. This is because I can hold my breath a really long time. If you can't hold your breath for more than like 10 minutes, you should probably wear a respirator. For this, I'm using what's called 2-stage paint. The first stage is the silver paint, called the base coat. The second stage is a protective coat called a clear coat. So I'm actually spraying twice. 2-stage painting is also called base coat clear coat. You may have heard of that. This is how most cars are painted. On the cabinet, I'm using a single stage paint. Single stage paint has the base coat and clear coat all in one, so you're only spraying once. So here's the finished product. Because this is automotive paint, if I wanted a mirror finish, I could sand and polish it, but this is just furniture. I think it turned out great, and this is a finish that I know will last a lifetime.
Did you actually get scared?